biggest challenge that they've faced as a woman in the IP field?
It's changed over time. I would say initially it was being the only woman in the room and not being an attorney. So I had zero credibility when I walked in the door to try and tell Chief IP Counsel how they should better integrate their work into the business, and that they weren't actually thinking about how to use IP for value within the business. So it really came down to having to show them that I knew what I was talking about and that I was willing to stand up and go toe to toe with them, that what I had to say was different than what they knew and had learned from law school. I also think that people underestimate you greatly when you are an underrepresented group. And so I think that we all the women on this call have learned coping mechanisms for how to walk into a room and deal with that underestimation. And so I think that you will find your way. What works for me may not work for Lisa or Karen or Precious, but we each have our own way that we deal with these situations. And so understanding your strengths, how you navigate this world, sometimes it is by being charming, sometimes it's by being aggressive, sometimes it's something else, right? So I think you just have to learn what works for you and your situations and understand that that's your particular style.
Great answer, Suzanne. Thanks for sharing. And Karen, your thoughts?
Yes, so for me, when I started practice, I mean, it was really a male-dominated domain in IP 30 years ago, both at the bar as well as the bench. When I started off, I was the only woman in the IP department of my firm, which was the largest law firm in Malaysia then, as it is now. Being a litigation lawyer in IP was always a challenge because the IP landscape was new, with new legislation and new regulations. And when appearing in court, I would always have to prepare for the art of war in court, arguing those precedent-making cases before judges who were not necessarily so familiar with this particular area of law. Now, the challenge was really in being firm and strong, gentle, yet argumentative, determined about your position, yet being humbled, and all this without appearing being obnoxious and arrogant. And I think that was really a very, very difficult issue to overcome. And the confidence sometimes was misconstrued or misunderstood as being arrogant because it was simply unexpected from an advocate who was, fighting very strongly about a particular position or for or against the opponent. But today I am delighted to say that in my firm, there are more women lawyers than there are men, and there are more women partners and women head of departments in the full service firm than they are of men. So, that's where we are today.
Excellent, Karen. And I appreciate you sharing. I mean, everyone here is helping to build on the momentum of change and making it more opportunities for women. And I appreciate you pointing out there has been change and there's going to continue to be. So thank you for that. Now we're going to go to Precious.
So for me, some of the biggest challenges have been finding people who do what I do within my proximity. The IP field is a niche sector in Africa, and much more finding women in IP, even more women in IP in Africa, is something that is very hard. And it's been hard for me to find fellow women who are active in IP. Hence, my biggest challenge has been finding women who have gone ahead of me and paved the pathway in terms of IP. So I have been able to create my own pathway. And despite the challenges, I feel like if we have more women working together, more platforms like this, collaborative platforms, Black women in IP, it would make things easier. So for me, the biggest challenge has just been finding people who do what I do within my space.
Thank you, Precious. And again, another example, doesn't have to be a lot of people doing it that are like you, but you can do it if you have confidence. And so thanks for sharing that. Mafi, as we call you, Maria Ferranda, you're up next.
Thank you, Scott. Well, for me, I guess the biggest challenge that I faced was the speaking up part. I had to deal during my professional life with different professional scenarios where my voice could have been heard, and I decided not to talk. Why? Because I was afraid of those persons that had more power, and they maybe were not happy with what I was going to tell them, and I was afraid of challenge their authority. And I lived through a decade where it was considered acceptable for a man, for instance, to harass you. I had that experience. It was an awful experience, flirting all the time and saying to you sexual-oriented language in the professional environment. I was afraid to death, and I didn't speak up. So I learned then later on that the speaking up part, I needed to improve it. And then I learned that I need to speak up, and, you know, our voice can be here at any time. You just need to be confident in yourself. But then that was a very scary and uncomfortable moment in my professional life.
Thank you, Maria Ferranda. Great answer. Appreciate that. And I love that. Don't be scared. Lisa Jorgensen, I'm going to ask you the same question. I'm going to add a little bit to it. What else, as you're answering the biggest challenges, what else would you point out there as we transition to helping women be successful in the IP field?
So I think you're already hearing some themes from things like what I had mentioned earlier. I spent a large portion of my time in a male-dominated environment, constantly being tested. And for me, one of the challenges was to learn not to be defensive, to really prove to people what my worth was for them, for that organization. Unfortunately, I started out very early trying to keep my head down, staying out of the fray. But I realized early on, after some period of time, that now and again you really had to look up and see where you were at, assess where you were at. Are you in the right role? Do you want to stay here? And the passion that you have, which is another theme you've been listening to, it will really be seen by a lot of people. And you have to ask yourself, am I still where I need to be? Do I need to make a change? Do I need to step out of my comfort zone, which I had to learn early on, how to embrace change, how to be able to speak up, as you've already heard as well, and not be silent when you really believe that you have something very valuable to offer. Another challenge for me, though, was really learning to take care of myself. If I learned to take care of myself, or when I learned to take care of myself, I did a better job of taking care of my family, and actually did a much better job at work, doing the work that I wanted to do and the work that was being asked of me. And again, I also talk about not being defensive, but also learning to be patient, that you can't solve all of your problems or all the world's problems in a day. So from that, you've also heard a theme, whether or not these words were used, but it's a theme of either being a mentor, or I'll add the word sponsor, or finding a mentor or a sponsor for yourself. I think one idea that I would propose would be to find that mentor or more valuable sponsor for you in your career. And I would start early on, but I would also acknowledge for me that my mentors and sponsors changed over all the years that I've been working. I also realized that a mentor or sponsor could have been one of my very close friends or a colleague, and not only a mentor or sponsor. And I also found that oftentimes throughout my career, a sponsor for me, I might not have known that person was a sponsor for many years to come. When an opportunity came up and somebody put my name in the hat for a different job or a different location, but I had no idea that that person would end up being a sponsor. So develop your relationships with other people, and the other piece is to take care of yourself so you can do a better job, both your personal life and your professional life.